Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Prep Life. Let's talk about this tragic catastrophe that took place in Lahaina on the west side of Maui in the state of Hawaii. A very old town dating back to the 1700s, used to be the capital of Hawaii, and now it's completely gone. We're talking about 2,200 houses completely lost, structures completely burned to the ground with 1,000-degree temperatures from the flames, fueled by 80-mile-per-hour winds. 80-mile-per-hour winds. Now, set that aside, and let's look at the human tragedy this is. Right now, the death count is at 100, with 1,300 people. 1,300 people still missing. So let me give you an update, because I'm getting these updates in real time and want to make sure that I'm giving you the information from people on the ground. A buddy of mine says, got off the phone with my friend who's been running fuel and supplies. Sounds like the people who have lost homes are staying with family for the most part. Those whose homes did not burn in Lahaina don't want to leave because there has been looting. Tap water is currently not potable, and there's still no electricity. Guys, we're 1 week into this. Super limited cell service. Sounds like the shelters are mostly filled with single people that may not have a strong network or family on the island. Heading there Thursday to work on processing venison in Maui, Nui venison. They've been working around the clock and are providing the only fresh protein available for the shelters. This is from my buddy Mark Healy at Healy Water Ops on Instagram. That's Healey. I also just read a post from Laird Hamilton that reports that we need everyone to stop all supply drop-off to Kahana, Maui, unless already scheduled with us. 3 storms and hurricanes are on the way, and we are currently working on distributing excess supplies and need to contain our current supply. They don't have the sheltering of these supplies, and they're exposed to the elements. So obviously, that's an important piece of information to put out. You know who's not putting out information about this current catastrophe? The national media. In any way. I mean, it's like 2 minutes on major national media headlines, and then they focus 30 minutes on Trump. I find that really bewildering. I also find it disgusting that when President Biden was asked today to comment about the ongoing efforts to help people in Hawaii, in the island of Maui, in the town of Lahaina, he said, no comments. And I'm paraphrasing. No comments. And he's on vacation. So you're the leader of the most powerful country in the world who visited Kiev, Ukraine as a surprise to show your support, but you're not traveling to your own country's state that is dealing with the largest natural disaster in American history. It currently is the largest wildfire, creating the most casualties and the most damage in American history in the last 100+ years. So you've decided to be on the wrong side of history. Let's set all of that aside and talk about what we know and how this started and how this compounded itself to being, I believe it's going to be one of the most significant catastrophes in modern history. It already is chalked up to be that when you have 100 casualties and 1,300 people missing. So I talked to a guy named Preston. I was connected by Josh Smith of Montana Knife Company, who put me in contact with Preston, who was on the ground at the time with his family. He told me that he saw the smoke, he saw what was taking place, and as this was starting to unfold, he had a buddy who was in town who saw the smoke and decided, hey, I'm going to pack a bag. I'm going to get things packed because we might have to displace. And he said in the 10 minutes it took him to pack the bag from a small fire, from a small billow of smoke he saw, it turned into a wall of an inferno, a tsunami of fire ripping through the town. Now, there are several speculations. I asked Preston, how do we think this started? Most locals think it started, one, in the solar fields, which are the fields beyond, I would say, east of the actual town of Lahaina that's on the west side of Maui, that's bordered, obviously, by the ocean. That most of it started when the power lines fell. the transformer or power system failed at the solar power section, and then you had intermittent fires starting all over the place. So it happened really quick. Now, the problem is in the infrastructure that is this area, you're looking at the entire town of Lahaina, a historic town that is nearly entirely made of wood. And it's basically tinder. So structures went up very fast. Now, one of the protocols in these type of disasters, especially when you have power lines that start to fall because of winds, is to de-energize the grid in certain sections to prevent fire or to prevent civilians being harmed by the electricity that's now on the ground. Except that wasn't done. In fact, today, a class action lawsuit was just filed against the power company for failing to de-energize the grid. So I talked to several locals. Both of them confirmed to me that many tourists were on the road at the time this took place because they were trying to get out of town. Now, there are main routes that tourists mainly know, and there are alternate routes, alternate back roads that most locals know. So the main thoroughfare that was gridlocked because when the power lines fell, first responders, as they should, started protecting the public and the community. So they started blocking the roads off, preventing civilians from running into the power lines and getting electrocuted. And when they did that, it gridlocked the traffic. And so people were getting out of their cars, wondering what was going on. And then the wall of flame started to move across the town, pushing them into the ocean. So they either perished inside their vehicles because they failed to get out, or they moved to the ocean. There are a lot of reports, a lot of content, a lot of videos from people in the water that survived from anywhere from 5 to 7 hours waiting or standing in, up to chest level water. I just saw a report as I came in here of a family that laid basically in water the entire time, both just putting their mouth above the water to get air and standing in the water in a pool in a hotel, in the pool. Water is like, what? Like, this is happening in our country. Why? Because we didn't have many other options. Now, there are 80 sirens in this town, supposedly, as reported, 80 sirens, because they have 80 emergency service sirens for the biggest proposed threat, which is tsunamis, right? You have an island, you have high ground, you have low ground, and that low ground will obviously be devastated by a tsunami. So you have 80 sirens, 80, that were never once activated. Now, obviously, if you're tethered to the infrastructure and the power grid and that goes down, well, you have nothing. The other thing that was reported that was alarming was when the power went out, the fire hydrants that the firefighters hooked up to did not have enough pressure to fight the original fires. Now, I don't know if that would have did anything because they started to get fires all over the town, but I want you to think about something. Most catastrophes, especially large-scale disasters, have a tipping point, right? Multiple steps that lead to a tipping point where everything rolls downhill, where the worst-case scenario criteria has been met and there's no turning back. Well, these are the steps that we could have done something about preemptively, with rehearsals, with practice, with equipment, with being better prepared, but we didn't. So when you have sirens that don't go off because they're tethered to electricity, then you should have backup. Because that early warning, which in this case would have saved many people, would have given those people minutes. And in this situation, according to every single person I talked to, they only had that to survive. Many of the people, as reported from social media, that perished were disabled, were overweight, or not willing to leave their homes originally when they started evacuating people. Most of the evacuations, by the way, did not happen by first responders. We say this a lot, guys. You are your own first response. It's nothing against first responders because they're great. The hard work and effort of the men and women of police, fire, and EMS right now that have lost everything, who are still on the job, getting little to no sleep, still doing the job, is something I'm not even, like, that's what they do. They're amazing. But they are not going to be on scene in the precious moments, sometimes seconds and minutes that you have to save your own ass. And this certainly was the case. I mean, there were reports of people knocking on doors and people saying, I have to get my belongings. And we were worried about material objects because that was their priority, and it potentially cost them their lives. Many people caught this on cell phone, and I get it. It's like the world we live in. And many of those, that cell phone footage has helped tell the story. But the priority for you is not picking up a technological piece of equipment to videotape unless it's putting out communication that is going to save your ass in the precious moments that you need. We call this immediate action. And your immediate action should be physically to displace from the crisis site, creating distance, creating time, and as many obstacles as you can in between you and the crisis site or the X. Get away. Do that on the fly. Text, call, all of that while your physical body is moving in a safe direction. Now, that's another problem here, because what's the safe direction? I talked to Mark Healy about this, and Mark said many of the people that potentially perished in the water. Some of that hasn't been reported because a lot of it has to do with the 2,200 buildings that went down in flames, but a lot of people who hit the water drowned. And obviously time will tell the complete story, but that's very tragic. Many people escaped in time in boats, but many people had to wade in water, and some of them swam out and never came back to shore. And that's super tragic. Let's talk about a few things that I talked to Preston about. One, many people right now, 6 days, now 7 days into this event, have been turned away. There's a report by pro surfer Ty Leaney. I heard this was addressed through his Instagram post because he has 1 million followers. He said something about it and it got fixed, but partially or maybe even mainly because he's a social media influencer and popular person. But there was a shipment of insulin that was supposed to get sent out on a plane that was stopped, I believe, by the Coast Guard. At least that's as it was reported to me. And it was stopped on the airfield, and they prevented it from being transported because it wasn't certified. We're hearing the same stories from FEMA and any federal organizations that are on the ground providing that support. Now, it's a fine balance. One, there are still residents in Lahaina that didn't lose completely everything, or they lost everything, but they're still there with no electricity, and they're just trying to get by. They're still in the disaster zone. But the people who displaced, the people who left that are in shelters outside of town, they want to get back in. And I get it that you're going to have to cordon off sections of this place because many of it includes casualties, people who have lost their lives, and you're going to treat this like a potential crime scene. You're going to be very sensitive to this because you don't want people looting. The fact that there's reports of people looting is disgusting, but it's the world that we live in. So I get it to an extent. The problem with federal emergency management systems, including FEMA and institutions affiliated, they're not going to be there in time. So who was there in time were local people helping local people. And that's a beautiful thing. That first response should be catered to, facilitated. I mean, when you have insulin, that's life-saving medical equipment, pharmaceuticals that are going to help people live, and you're stopping it because you don't have the authority, that bothers me, especially when it's the federal government coming into an area, right? Coming and occupying an area and telling the locals what they can and can't do. But welcome to the real world. Welcome to America right now, right? There needs to be a balance. The problem with all of this, when I put on my crisis response hat, academically, I have a degree in crisis management and emergency response. I've planned real-world hostage rescue, real-world non-combatant evacuations. I did the non-combatant evacuation plan for Maui. I did a whole bunch of things related to emergency preparedness, And I see all of these things that take place, and I realized they never had a plan. And if they did, none of the plans worked because they didn't have a rehearsed plan. They didn't have an appropriate plan. And that's a huge problem. So we're either going to continue to make the same mistakes and have another disaster, because certainly we're having more disasters, wildfires, catastrophes, natural and man-made, or we could stop. We could talk about the issues, and we could identify what we could do better the next time. Now, I'm not going to do that here because I want to talk about the things that are ongoing. It's not the time nor place, but I'm going to collect all this information and do an emergency action plan review and lessons learned. I'm going to tell you what you could do to better prepare yourself in the worst case scenario. One of the things is have a plan. That's obvious, right? But have a plan that is most realistic in your current situation. I don't mean like, yeah, we're going to get in the vehicle and we're going to drive down the road. Well, if you're in Maui and you know there's only one road in and one road out in Lahaina, you're not going to plan that. In fact, we just did a mobility experience with Kyle Cooper, Mike Hernandez, Kurt Williams, all these amazing students, and we focused part of our blocks of instruction on alternate plans to including routes and vehicles. Your main vehicle won't get down the road. Well, you should have a motorcycle, an electric bike, the means to transport you and your family away from that catastrophe off the beaten path. Certainly a lot of locals did that, which is what saved them. I talked to many locals. In fact, this has been reported on social media that used motorcycles to get off grid and get away from the fire. That is like the horseback that has the motor and no sensitivity. Like you're going to get on it and you're going to roll through that town using those alternate routes and break contact quickly. I mean, there are reports that I saw of a mini documentary by a private news organization where the man who survived ran 5 miles down the road. If you aren't fit and you aren't prepared, you are going to perish. This guy had to run 5 miles down the road, and then he hit the sea to save his life. When I look at cell phone tower infrastructure, guys, the cell phone tower infrastructure is tethered to electricity. If the electricity goes down because the wind pushes it down and they shut down the power, you have to go into alternate means of power. That's the generator, right? Those systems should have redundant elements to allow those systems to still operate and work. One of the biggest errors in this entire catastrophe is how hard is it to set up independent communication systems that are foolproof, that are bomb-proof, that are fireproof, that are allowing you and emergency services to communicate. It's why we teach people at AmericanContingency.com all about ham radio. It's why we bring Josh Noss Ham Radio Crash Course from the YouTube channel and bring him in as an expert. It's why we put ham radio communications on the application on Fieldcraft Survival's app. This stuff is very important. In fact, I asked Preston, I said, what is one of the most important things right now? It's not water. It's not food. It's not even supplies because they have plenty of it. It's communication. It's radios. And how are we getting those radios? We're not getting it from the federal government, guys. We're not even getting it from the state government. You know where we're getting it from? Elon Musk. Elon Musk is coming in with Starlink to get the systems up so emergency responders can communicate to their own people. They could do communications outside, and they have that capability internally to the government, but we need it for civilians. So the great thing about these circumstances, if there's anything that we could take away from it that's somewhat positive, is how we could change the future for our children and our children's children so this never happens again. I mean, this is a complete and utter disaster on many levels. I'm not pointing the finger. I don't have enough information. I don't understand the complexities of the situation on the ground. There's plenty of heroes in this. There's plenty of amazing people who are doing amazing things. But the villain in this case, I don't think it's anybody individually. I don't think it's a group of people. The villain is the circumstance. We could learn from this and we could be better for it. All right, guys, I'm going to head off to the underground. If you haven't seen this show, I do a YouTube appropriate version of this, which you're getting, and then I go to Patreon and do the underground and talk a little bit deeper in the weeds, uncensored, on everything that we talked about on my patreon.com/Mike Glover. I want to say big shout out to everybody who surged my Patreon on my uncensored reacts recently. I appreciate you guys, because this is not a sponsored show. I do this because I care about the mission of teaching how to be best prepared in the worst case scenario. And I appreciate you guys. Lastly, I want to talk about this new product that my company, Wolf 21, just developed for first responders called Ruck Up. Now, this won't be available for a little while, but I wanted to give you a teaser and offer you a discount of 25% using Prepped25 in the link below on all of our products, which are mainly CBD based. CBN, CBD, all the great cannabinoids. But you guys said, hey, I'm a first responder. I can't have that when I want the tactical response that has CBG in it for the upper, right? The natural upper. So I said, hey, team, let's make something happen. So we made an energy and endurance, athletic performance, stress adaptability, mood, and cognition formula, which includes cordyceps, which is a high potency extract from a mushroom to support clean energy, stamina, and mood without a crash. Aquamin S, which is 72 trace minerals for cellular hydration, and B complex. This is going to give you the energy without the risk of even hemp derived. That's not THC derived, but even hemp derived of you having trace anything that has to do with THC. I don't want to see you get in trouble. I don't want to promote that. So we did make this special formula for you, and it's available on Wolf 21. So guys, hey, I appreciate you guys. I'm headed off to the underground right now. Prayers and shout outs. Prayers to all the people, all the victims, and everybody that's going through this. Many people lost loved ones. I just heard a young man say he lost 9 members of his family. I can't even wrap my head around that. 9 members of his family completely gone, and he's a young man. And big shout out to all the men and women who are doing the good work that's necessary, including the first responders that are getting this done. This is not a temporary catastrophe. This is not 30 seconds in the headlines. This is something that has to be managed for the days, the weeks, the months, and even years to come. One thing I'm scared of that I'll talk about in the underground is this was potentially a land grab opportunity, because I want to see the people of Hawaii restore their history, and I don't want to see that be developed. I don't want to see it turned over to the government. I want to see it be restored, because the Hawaiian people deserve that. The people of Maui deserve it. The people of Lahaina deserve that, and they should get that. Till next time, guys. Peace out.